Welcome, Irish fans, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. I'm Vince DeDario, and with me, as always, is the publisher of irishbreakdown.com. That's Bryan Driskell. And, so there was a national championship game last night. And, usually when after Notre Dame season ends, I kind of get into like a depressed funk, and I don't really want to watch any other games. But I was very intrigued as to how last night's game was going to play out for many reasons. From the, Ohio State only played 6 games to get into the college football playoff, to the way that they dispatched of Clemson, to how good I believe that Alabama was on offense. What was that going to look like against Ohio State? Lot of storylines going into that game. And to be perfectly honest, it went pretty much the way I anticipated that it would go. If you go over to irishbreakdown.com, Bryan and I and a couple of other guys from the staff put out our predictions as to how we thought this game was going to go. And I think Bryan and I both had Ohio State's offensive number a little bit higher. I was close on Alabama. I said 49. I think they ended up with 52. But I said 35 for Ohio State, and they only ended up with 24. And those were some tough earned points, it felt like to me. So it was an interesting game. Bryan, I want to get your thoughts overall on the game, and then we're gonna jump into what that means from a Notre Dame standpoint. In other words, where do we think Notre Dame sits to be competitive from a national championship standpoint? And we're going to break it down on offense and defense. But overall, just on the game itself, Alabama versus Ohio State, your thoughts?
I think the only surprising thing to me, Vince, is I thought Ohio State's offense would have put up a little bit more of a fight. This was an offense that had really been explosive all year. My concern was they really only played one defense that was good in the regular season. That was Northwestern, and they struggled. They beat up on Clemson, but you and I have been talking all year, Vince. This is not your normal Clemson defense.
Agreed.
And I think sometimes you just have one of those games. Sometimes you just get hot.
Sure.
And I think that Ohio State got hot in that game. It just was one of those days, and if Notre Dame and Clemson played again, do I think Clemson would beat Notre Dame 34-10 every time they played? No, we saw that because Notre Dame was more competitive against them early in the year. And again, it was a different looking team, but I don't put a whole lot into, the transitive property of, because Ohio State beat Clemson and then Clemson beat Ohio State, that's just not how it works. It never works that way. I just thought Ohio State played as well as you could possibly play. Could they do that again against Alabama? That's what they needed to do to keep it competitive. But I thought that they would score more. That was the only thing that was surprising to me. I thought that this is a defense. I mean, I tweeted late in the game, like, this is a defense that gave up almost 500 passing yards to Michael Penix and over 200 receiving yards to Travis Freifogel, at Indiana. I mean, what did you think was going to happen when they played Mac Jones and Najee Harris and Devontae Smith, right? Like, they're not good on defense. And that's the thing is, what the game showed me is that Ohio State, for all their highly ranked recruits on defense, they've been pretty below average to average on defense in 2 of the last 3 years. The one year they weren't average was when they had Jeff Hafley running the defense. So BC fans are probably feeling really good about their future right now, as long as he stays. But it went how it went, how I expected it to go. Vince, I made a comment to a couple friends. I think you were one of them during the season that I think Alabama is going to start a slow decline, but I felt this was going to be their last great team.
Okay.
And I thought all the stars that kind of aligned, Najee coming back, Devontae Smith, you had this offensive line that's just going to get ravaged by the NFL next year. I think their defensive recruiting hasn't been as good in recent years as it used to be, but some of the leftover big-time recruits, Patrick Surtain, Christian Barmore, Dylan Moses, those guys are still there. And so I felt like Alabama was in a sort of a last hurrah kind of thing where they were going to be this dominant. Now, a slow decline means they're still a playoff contender every year. They're still going to be a title contender for a couple years, but I think we're going to see them start to have more years like last year than what we saw this year. And I think the stars also kind of aligned for them too, because their division was Auburn was down.
Right.
LSU was ravaged by NFL departures, and Clemson was down. Notre Dame, I thought just kind of gave them that game, didn't even put up much of a fight. And then Clemson was down. So it was a down year in college football in a lot of ways, but it was Alabama peaking. So everything kind of lined up well for Alabama this year, and that's why I predicted them to win the championship before the year. But when I look at this team, I say, this is what modern football is about. It's now 2 years in a row of examples of, if you want to win a championship, you have to score. I mean, year after year, that same story is being proven out. And if you don't have a great defense, you have no chance in a game like this. If Ohio State would have had Notre Dame's defense, they'd have had a shot last night, because that game would, their offense was able to stay with Bama for a little while.
Right. Yes, they were. Yep.
But you just, after a while, it's like if you make one mistake or two mistakes on offense and you don't score, and your defense is what Ohio State's defense was this year, you're going to get run off the field. And that's exactly what happened. So you have to have a defense that's elite in order to just simply make enough stops to keep them in a manageable striking distance. And Ohio State didn't have that. And so, the game, I thought I had 44-37 as my final. I predicted I kind of saw Ohio State scoring late to kind of make it a little closer than it was. But I was not surprised. I was not surprised by the outcome of last night's game. It was still fun to watch, though. That's a fun.
No, it was fun to watch. Yeah, I think from an offensive standpoint, what was fun for me was, and you talked about how there might be a steady decline at this point for Alabama, and I get all that. I totally do. I think look, Steve Sarkisian is obviously leaving to go to Texas, but when they would go to the All-22 and you would see the breakdown of how some of these offensive plays were put together. And how they were able to isolate Devontae Smith. And look, I get it. He's a Heisman Trophy winner. Mm-hmm. You don't have to tell me. But there were times where he was running so wide open that it didn't really matter who that particular person was. They probably still would have been open.
Right.
And that was all by play design. And that was by scouting. And that was by game planning and all of that. Why are you laughing at me?
Because you're 100% right. You're nailing it. And I'll explain why I'm laughing. You finish your point. You're making great points. I'm 100% on board with you.
Okay. I have that's what stood out to me. It wasn't even the play. It wasn't even Devontae Smith going over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half. It was how they got him open and how they got him lined up with linebackers. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, that was – if they continue to do that –
bad coaching as well on defense.
Agreed. No, I agree. But what I am saying is that you can take better than average players with good game planning and make them look elite. But if you have elite players with this kind of game plan, you make them look amazing. And that's what happened last night, in my opinion.
The reason I'm laughing, Vince, is because you're hitting it right on the head. And my laughing was – Alabama is the only team in the country that would be justified to say, we're going to do what we do. We're just going to line up and do what we do, because they have the best player. I mean, they have Najee Harris. They have Devontae Smith. They have the best offensive line in the country. Yet game after game after game of you and I studying Alabama, you're like, good Lord, what a great play call. And it's not a great play call that requires Devontae Smith to – you don't need a Devontae Smith to run a post corner route. And I'll give you a perfect example. It was the corner route that he caught this first half. It was, he was to the left. And what it was a two-man route, really. They had and Ohio State had a great play call later off this defensively. But anyway, Alabama was in a 2 tight end alignment. Imagine
you need
that.
Your whiteboard. You need
I know, right?
You need your whiteboard.
I got to get it set up, man. I got to get it set up. But it was so it was a 2 tight end look. You had tight end of each side. The tight end to the right pass block, the right, tight end left just ran like an under route. He was essentially the check down guy. Devontae Smith was to the left, and the other receiver, I think it was John Mechie, was to the right. Okay, so 12 personnel, right? Notre Dame can do that. And they ran what is about one of the most basic football concepts that you see off play action, Vince. It looked like it was going to be a post, sort of like a post dig or a post deep drag over top where you're isolating that safety. You know, you're thinking the play action is going to get the linebackers to bite. And so then you're making your high-low read off the post to the drag. And Alabama runs that. But on this play, it looked like the post, right? So the corner is inside, has Devontae Smith inside of him. In his line of sight is a crossing route, deep crossing route coming right at him, or drag. You can call it whatever you want. And so the corner has to say, the drag's coming at me. I got to squat on the drag. And he takes the drag out. But then instead of running a post right into the safety, they bang a post corner. And Devontae Smith is wide open. And it was just great play calling. And you know, and to Kerry Coombs' credit, later in the game, I think it was a series or two later, they ran a similar play and where they motioned the tight end down. And it looked to me like the play call by Kerry Coombs was, if that guy motions in again like that, you blitz off that side because he's pass blocking. And then they booted right into the blitz and he knocked it out. It was a very similar action. So, you know, that's the chess match I love about football. But just time and time again, as I'm breaking down Alabama, I'm thinking, what great schemes. And yes, it's great that you have great players. But you telling me that Kyron Williams can't run a wheel route the way that Najee Harris did? You know what I mean? Like there were so many concepts where I'm like, man, that's something Notre Dame could easily do with their personnel. And
well, even the motion on the one touchdown pass, it was Devontae Smith. He went in motion, he stopped, he came back, he stopped again, and all that was to just get the littlest leverage on the defender because they knew it was man-to-man. There was a guy that was following him back and forth, and you could see him trying to mirror what Smith was going back and forth just enough. Then he got speed and beat him to the end zone. All you need is a little bit of leverage to make that happen. And all you need is a guy with speed.
Right.
Notre Dame has speed. They can do that sort of because it's average play, not a player making a play, it's play. And that is calling and scheme and play design, I should say, not play calling, but play design and scheme, because you know what they're trying to do. So again, that's what stood out to me. It wasn't how amazing Devontae Smith was, because he is, okay? He just is. But the ways that they got him open, you can do with other guys.
Devontae Smith is a great player. But Devontae Smith isn't getting that open just because he's a great player.
Exactly.
Right. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with this conversation. And so for me, Vince, that's why I say, yes, it's about talent, but it's also about doing things schematically from a coaching standpoint, from a fundamental standpoint, from a moving your personnel around, finding isolations, finding matchups, and doing all those things to where you say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And we saw that Ohio State too. One of the things I talked about leading into the Notre Dame Ohio State game is, if you're not using your linebackers and running backs to attack their linebackers and safeties, you're not doing this thing right. And what does Ohio State do? You know, they set up their first touchdown with a seam route against a linebacker with their tight end. And Jeremy Ruckert's a good player.
He's not Michael Mayer.
Take Tommy Tremble and Michael Mayer over him.
Absolutely.
You know, and so we saw a lot of that. We saw really well coached teams.
Yeah.
Going toe to toe. We saw it last year with LSU and Clemson. I mean, when you watch LSU last year, the things they would do with their receivers to schematically put them in good positions was phenomenal. Whereas Notre Dame, Brian Kelly's constantly complaining about how they don't have explosive players, but then you're asking, like he's doing with Ben Skoranek, what Alabama could get away with doing with Devontae Smith is, I'm just going to ask you to be better than the guy across from you.
Correct.
We're not going to really game plan you. We know where Javon McKinley's going to line up on every snap. I know where Ben Skoranek's going to be on every snap. And that's just not conducive to really
I agree.
Using your scheme to maximize what you do. And that's the difference between the modern offense and the antiquated offense that Brian Kelly's trying to run. So, you know, when I look at it, I say, look, Notre Dame has talent to be a much, much better offense. Do I think that they're going to go out next year and score 49 points a game? No. But with the defense they've had the last 3 years, they don't have to score 50 points. They've shown. They held Clemson to 30 points in the first matchup in the playoff. They held Clemson to 34 in the ACC title game. They held Alabama to 31. Now, I do believe Alabama took their foot off the gas, and I think Alabama could have put one more score on the board.
Sure.
Maybe a score and a field goals. But again, if you can hold Alabama to 38 points, you're giving yourself a chance to win.
You're still in the 30s and they average 49 and a half.
Notre Dame was able to make stops to where if Ohio State would have made as many stops in the first 7 possessions as Notre Dame made in their first 7 possessions, they'd had a chance to be in that game in the fourth quarter because their offense was keeping them with it. Their defense couldn't make stops. So, and we'll tie this into where Notre Dame is, but like that's modern football.
Correct.
I think I saw Ben, my guy at the Sporting News, Ben Belder, had a thing where he showed the average starting or the average scoring points per game for the teams that have won the national title game is 40 points. So that's where you got to be.
You have to be in the 40s, yeah.
And that was dragged down by the 2017 Alabama-Georgia game, which was 26-23 because you had 2 SEC teams. This is before Alabama had made the full transition into what they are now.
Correct.
And so it just goes to show that it is talent. You need talent, right?
Yeah,
so
you do. Of course you do.
Troy's not going to take Alabama's offense, run the same exact plays, and win a national championship, right? Like you need players. But my point is Notre Dame has enough players to be better than they are. And
correct.
And some of this stuff is not complicated, Vince. Like if you're watching last night's game and you're still thinking, yeah, I don't think RPOs are all that important to what we're doing, then you need to find another job. You need to find something else to do with your career because coaching isn't it, and so it just, there was so much where you're like, this is the modern game, right? Like, we saw 2 different versions of the modern game. You have Ohio State, which is a spread offense, right? A spread offense that is a very pro style in some of their concepts they do, but more of a traditional college offense.
Sure.
And
then zone reads and things like that. Yeah.
And then you see out, misdirections, bootleg. Then you see Alabama, which is more of a traditional pro style approach. So, and then Clemson is a pure spread. So you see these 3 teams that are winning it and playing for championships. And what they're doing is in Ohio State, when in 2014, when they won it, was a pure spread offense. So it can be different forms. This isn't talking about like in Oklahoma's an air raid, right? And again, if Oklahoma, everybody's, if Oklahoma had Notre Dame's defense, Oklahoma would have a national championship. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
You give that 2017 Baker Mayfield team Notre Dame's defense that year, they've got a ring, right? They'd have beat Georgia. Notre Dame held Georgia to 20 points, right? They'd have beat Alabama. That was not a great Alabama team. I'm sorry. Oklahoma would have won a national title that year if they had Notre Dame's defense. And I think they would have been impressive looking with Notre Dame's defense because they would have made so many more stops that their offense would have scored a lot more points.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, you have to be good on defense to win a title. You can't be Oklahoma, right? I'm not saying that. Never will say that. But you can't be a great defense and not have an offense like this. That's just the game. Yep. And so that's what last night made very clear to me. And I'll say this before we dive into where Notre Dame is relative to this Notre Dame team. I thought last night's Alabama game plan compared to what they did 10 days before against Notre Dame shows how much more respect they have for the Notre Dame defense compared to the Ohio State. They had no fear of the Ohio State defense, no respect for the Ohio State defense. None. They were taking shots. They were getting isolated. They were going after Sean Wade. They weren't concerned about Sean Wade making play. I mean, we're coming at you. They made one throw. We've talked about this many times. They made one throw beyond 20 yards against Notre Dame. And again, part of that, we're being honest and objective, was they had no fear and respect for Notre Dame's offense. None. Once they got into that game and they realized Notre Dame's not going to attack us, then that's similar to what Clemson did in 2018. They just said, okay, we know Notre Dame's not going to score on us, so we're not going to give their defense a chance to go make a play to get them back in the game. This is the second time we've seen that. I remember talking to people after the Clemson game in 2018 and hearing what Clemson coaches were saying to other coaches about the Notre Dame defense. They were concerned. And I'm hearing the same thing from people about this 2020 Notre Dame defense. Now, the difference is this defense isn't as deep in the starting lineup as that one was at the secondary level. But this front 7 from Notre Dame is one that people respect and are concerned about. Alabama showed that. Their game plan last night showed me that they had no respect for Ohio State, with has 4 5-star here, 5-star there. that, you know, and all this recruiting thing, Notre Dame had 7 3-star players in their starting lineup, and they were far more competitive against Alabama, foot off the gas or not. They didn't take their foot off to the gas to the tune of they'd have scored 52 on Notre Dame.
Right.
That's for darn sure. They might have got to 38, 41, but they weren't hanging 52 on Notre Dame.
Right.
That's for darn sure.
Right. And they certainly weren't going to have 35 at halftime.
Correct. Now, part of that was Notre Dame's game plan of they weren't going to give Alabama enough possessions. Alabama only had
which I'm okay with too, which I'm okay with. I within reason, right. I get it. That's not a bad strategy against a high-powered, high-octane offense.
Right.
But there's a huge but there, and we've talked about that. I'm not going to get into
Ohio
it,
State kind of had the right way of going about it, which is they're going to run the ball, but you still have to push for scores.
Absolutely, yeah, you know? for sure.
But anyway, I digress. But I did think that showed. And again, I broke down. I think like 9 of the 11 games that Alabama played this year. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the Kentucky game. You know, I mean, there's a couple games I just was like, yeah, I'm not going to get anything out of that. And they never had a game plan that had as little vertical aspects to their pass game as what we saw against Notre Dame.
That's all I heard going into the game is what a beautiful deep ball Mac Jones has. And the reason people say that is they saw it a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you only watch Bama against Notre Dame, you'd have thought this guy never throws the ball downfield. This guy is what Notre Dame fans complain about Ian Book being. All he does is just throw short throws.
Captain check down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, that was because they were not going to give the Notre Dame defensive line or Jeremiah Wusu or Kyle Hamilton a chance to impact the game.
Yeah. And that's what you do. That's called game planning. Right. But that's another conversation.
Anyway. So,
all right. Yeah, so I want to talk about where we think Notre Dame is from a competitive national championship level situation. So what we're going to do when we come back from the break is we're going to talk about the Notre Dame offense, where we think they are competitive from a national championship standpoint and where they need to improve. And then we're going to do the defense, same thing, where they're competitive right now and where they need to improve. And so we will do that right after we hear from one of our sponsors. Hey, everyone. Before we get into today's pod, I want to tell you about Blue Wire Hustle, a brand new program where you can host your very own podcast here at Blue Wire. Hustle was created to give everyone an opportunity to take your podcast to the next level. Or if you want to host a podcast and just don't know where to start, Hustle is the perfect place for you. As part of the program, you'll receive personal cover art, Q&As with Blue Wire's top podcasters, access to our community Discord, and an e-learning course full of tips and tricks. On top of that, we'll help you get your show pushed out to Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and all other listening platforms. The best part is you can get all of this for only $15 a month, the same rate that any other hosting site would charge you just for the initial setup alone. So whether you're starting from scratch or have an existing show that you want to grow, Hustle is an open door to leveling your sports experience. Acceptance into the program is limited, so get your application in today. To apply, go to bwhustle.com/join. Check out that description box to find out more, but that's bwhustle.com/join. So I couldn't help but watch the game last night and think to myself, man, I could see Notre Dame being competitive in this area, or man, Notre Dame's got a bit of a ways to go in this area.
Right.
I mean, look, that's we spend all of our time, because that's our job, is breaking down Notre Dame and seeing Notre Dame on a week-to-week basis. So that's my point of reference when I'm watching other games, is where would Notre Dame stack up against the teams that I'm watching. And I was doing that last night. And I have a feeling you were probably doing something similar as you were watching the game.
Always do that when I'm watching good teams. Compared to, and I think you have to do that if you truly want to understand where Notre Dame is, and if you truly want to understand where Notre Dame needs to get to, and if you're someone who like me believes that Notre Dame is a program capable of winning a national championship in the modern era, then you need to be able to look and see what are other teams doing. Is it just about talent? And if it is, where can you get that similar talent, or where can you get talent to neutralize that talent?
Right.
And so, which is what the 88 team did. You know, they had Rocket, they had Todd Light, they had some elite athletes, but they didn't have the depth of speed across the board that Miami had. So where they did is they neutralized it in the trenches.
Sure.
So there's those kind of things. And I say this is certainly the closest Notre Dame has been to one of these elite teams in a long time at most positions. Agree. But as to your point, I do think there are some key areas where if Notre Dame doesn't work to get better quickly, it's going to have a negative impact on they're either going to get closer or they're going to start falling back.
Sure.
And we're about to hit that 2-year stretch where that's going to happen.
Yep.
And so that's the interesting part. But I do think if you look at where Notre Dame is right now, they're better, I think, than Alabama, or as good than Alabama at a few places.
Yeah, sure. And I don't think you could have said that, honestly, back in 2012, for example.
There was a couple individual players that were, Tyler Martin.
But not the
Tyler
health
Eifert,
of a position
Zach
group.
Martin, right,
yeah.
exactly. Manti, but and the gaps back then were enormous.
Yes. The gaps are smaller, but
at all but one position, the gaps are smaller, in my opinion. Well, 2 now. And we'll get into the second one when we start talking about the defense. But offensively, I'll take Notre Dame's offensive line in 2017 and 2020 and put it against anybody. And even the 2018 and 2019 lines, when you and I were being critical of Jeff Quinn last year, we kept saying, like, this is being critical when you're holding through the standard of
what Notre Dame's offensive
in the
line
country.
should be.
There was still a lot of teams that would have said, we'll take Notre Dame's offensive line, right?
Sure.
Because that's the whole standard. It's not like, well, I'm criticizing Jeff Quinn because he's terrible. No, is he going to be able to develop a championship caliber line?
Sure. Yeah,
2020 he did. You look at the future of the position. They've got 9 or 10 4-star players coming back. They've got 4 or 5 top 100 recruits. Now, again, recruiting isn't an end-all be-all.
It's not.
That's what we have to go with when guys haven't played a whole lot.
Sure.
And that's what everybody points. Well, of course, Devontae Smith is good. He's a highly ranked player. Okay, well, whatever. I mean,
there's a litany of highly ranked players that didn't pan out. So that's another conversation.
Joe Burrow was I think the number 280 player in the country and a borderline 4-star. Mac Jones was a 3-star player, the number 399 player in the country. And those two guys in back-to-back years beat the number 1 player in the country in Trevor Lawrence and the number 2 player in the country in Justin Fields in back-to-back games. So again, a quarterback doesn't always have to be a 5-star. It's about development. So when you talk about offense, to me, that's the big thing. Tight end, I wouldn't trade Notre Dame's tight ends for anybody.
Nope.
And I'm talking starters, backups, and that's been true for most of the last 5-6 years. There was a couple stretches in 16, 17, 18 where, Alizé Mack wasn't quite panning out, had some injuries, and but then you get the Brock Wright and the Cole Kmet class, and then you've got Tommy Trumbull and George Takis, and then so Chip Long did a great job of rebuilding the tight end depth chart, which had kind of taken a step back in the years before he got here. And now you look at it and say, you look at the future of the tight end depth chart, and you're like, they're absolutely loaded. Running back, I'll take Notre Dame's running backs and say, they can go. You can win with that. Am I saying they're better than this guy or that guy? No, but
are they? But can you use that room?
Right.
Coupled with the rest of the team to win a national championship? The answer is yes, in my opinion. The answer is yes. So Kyron Williams, Chris Tyree, is that's a good room, and you've got some pretty good young depth pieces coming, which is key as well, obviously.
Right. And it's not just about the talent of the players; it's also about specific skill sets, right? You've got an explosive guy, and Kyron Williams isn't a home run hitter per se. But he showed against Clemson and Florida State that if you give him a 4.55 guy is not getting caught from behind by a 4.4 guy unless that guy's 2 steps behind him.
Correct.
Right? And so he can hit home runs. But Kyron is that all-around back that you can line him up in the slot. You can throw him the ball out of the backfield. I think he was very much underutilized for Notre Dame this year. Even though they used him, it was like, why aren't you doing that instead of once per game, 5 times per game?
Sure.
Why aren't you using him in the slot with Chris Tyree as your running back, and you're running RPOs where if they come to play the run, you're pulling and hitting a slant to Kyron Williams. There's so many things you could do if you wanted to get creative with it.
Right.
Like, Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and LSU do with their personnel. Okay. I'll take that room.
Sure.
Are either of them first-round draft picks? Probably not. But
running backs
you
sometimes aren't.
You wouldn't have said Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a first-round running
Right.
back after his first and second years of college either.
Right.
They're the modern system. They fit that Clyde
Correct.
Edwards-Helaire, Najee Harris skill. Now, their body types are different, but how Najee is used is, look, Najee Harris averaged 5.8 yards per rush this year. Do you know who had a higher yards per carry average than that? Rhetorical question. Tony Jones Jr. Tony Jones Jr. averaged more yards per carry than Najee Harris, but running behind the best offensive line in the country.
And that's the key. Yeah.
Dexter had a higher yards per carry than Tony Jones Jr., and Josh Adams had a higher yards per carry than all of them.
Right.
And in 2015, you had Josh Adams and CJ Prosise combined for about 7 yards a carry. Yeah. Running back has not been Notre Dame's problem.
Right.
Yes, Autry Denson recruited poorly, but Chip Long and Lance Taylor quickly made up for that with Kyron Williams, with Chris Tyree, Landon Audric Estime in the 2021 class. And I still think they're going to get Logan Diggs.
That's a pretty good haul. Yeah,
I'll take that. And Sebo Flemister is not a bum. That kid can play
not at all
specific role.
Correct.
Sebo adds value.
Absolutely.
So I got no problem with where Notre Dame is as a running back. I've never been a believer that you needed a 5-star running back to be successful. There, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, go look up his recruiting ranking. Okay. And you'll see that it's, he wasn't anywhere close to what Chris Tyree is as a recruit. So anyway, the point is, I feel good about that room. I feel good about the tight end room. I feel good about
the offensive line room. To
great.
Be honest with
you got to feel great about that.
Those 3 rooms, I feel really, really good about.
They can play with anybody.
Correct.
Anybody.
Correct.
Receiver to me is not where it needs to be, but I don't necessarily think it's talent. I think part of it is bad luck. Kevin Austin and Braden Lindsey being banged up this year hurt them. Now, how much would they have been used if healthy? We don't know the answer to that. I'll give the staff the benefit of the doubt and say that they were going to use them.
Right.
The other problem has been usage. I keep hearing, I remember after the 2018 loss to Clemson, Brian Kelly kept talking about, well, we needed more explosive playmakers. And I'm like, bruh, you have Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what more, and then they both ran out and ran like 4.42s at the combine, and everybody was shocked. And I'm like, I wasn't shocked. I watched them play every week.
Shocked.
It was the same argument I had back then. Like, look, I'm at the games. I'm watching film. I'm seeing Miles Boykin cannot be covered. I'm watching Miles Boykin beat Clemson's corners on post routes. I'm watching Michael Young get open on a deep drag for what should have been a 40, 50-yard gain against Clemson. I'm watching Chase Claypool get open on a post route for what should have been a big play against Clemson. Is there a level where they can upgrade the talent at receiver? Sure. It's definitely an area where they can continue to upgrade. You've got another great class coming in. But, hey, Devontae Smith wasn't a 5-star receiver. Do you know how many 5-star receivers took the field for Alabama last night? Zero.
Okay.
Devontae was in the 60s on the composite ranking, right? Slade Bolden was a 3-star, and John Mechie was ranked like 270 or 280, but lower than Avery Davis, by the way. So they're extremely talented, but they've also been coached. You watch those guys play, and this is what I've said about Devontae Smith all along. He's not the freaky athlete that Henry Ruggs or maybe even Jerry Jeudy or those guys were. He's so incredibly skilled, and he's always been that way. I mean, you could see some film of him in high school, and he was a great route runner. But he's well coached. He's well schooled. If you give me Braden Lindsey and give me a receivers coach and I don't blame Del Alexander because I don't think this is something that's demanded from the head coach on down. Give me a receivers coach that's going to teach these guys how to play the game, and then give me an offensive system that's going to do things to move them around. Devontae Smith lined up at 4 or 5 different positions last night. How are you not doing that with Will Fuller? You knew where Will Fuller was going to line up every single play. And he was just so good that he could go out and dominate, right? But you can't just ask a guy to run by people, because when you have Ben Skoranek and Javon McKinley and Avery Davis, you need to utilize them. You're telling me that you watch some of these freshmen and sophomores and you're saying those guys are light years away ahead of Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts? You can't convince me of that, because you're telling me these Notre Dame kids are so stupid that they can't figure out how to run a hitch, a slant, and a jet sweep. That they can't even get a snap.
Right.
It's a usage problem. Now, again, continue to upgrade the receiver room. But if you're running the system that Alabama or Clemson, I'm sorry, I will not trade Notre Dame's receiving core for Clemson's. They just use them better.
You're correct.
Simple as that.
It's a scheme. We've said it a million times. It's the scheme.
Notre Dame couldn't cover Amari Rodgers. Well, guess what? Clemson couldn't cover Avery Davis. The difference is when Amari got open, the quarterback threw him the ball. Notre Dame quarterback didn't. And that leads me to the final thing, which is quarterback.
Right.
More than any.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Of course.
I do want to echo what you're saying. So we decided, and I agree with you. Offensive line, tight end, running back, we're good.
Good enough to win.
Wide receiver
as a group. As a group, that's a good enough group. That's a core group,
and that's what I want to say.
With. Yeah.
Is there a Heisman Trophy winner in there? Probably not. But the schemes that I saw last night from Alabama, if you plug in Notre Dame's players, the ones that haven't seen a whole lot of playing time, the ones that are in that room, they can do what was done last night. I'm telling you, you can win with that room.
Right.
I am confident you can win with that room.
To your point, are they scoring 52 on Ohio State? No. But they don't need to score 52 against Ohio State because I think they're better on defense.
They have a better defense. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're right. The next position, obviously, we're going to talk about the quarterback room. That's where you need an upgrade. You need a guy that's going to go and get the ball into the hands of those people that we just talked about in a manner that will make you successful.
I think it goes way deeper than Ian Book for me.
I do too. Because I don't think you can blame Ian Book all you want for the loss to Alabama in the college football playoff. I don't think it's his fault.
He wasn't put in position to beat Alabama.
That's exactly right. And he wasn't used to the ability that he has to beat Alabama.
Right.
So I don't blame Ian Book for that. I really don't.
There's no way Ian Book was going to beat Alabama, no matter how well he played with the offense that Notre Dame runs.
Right.
Without the defense forcing 2-3 turnovers.
Correct.
And the reason I say that is because, again, you're asking Ian Book and those receivers to run concepts that demand that we physically be better than you. It's almost like Notre Dame should be running what Alabama runs, and Alabama should be running what Notre Dame runs.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you talk about personnel.
Yep.
And that just goes to show that you don't take for granted your talent. You say, okay, I got talent. Let's build a system that we can do things. I mean, you ask yourself why, Will Fuller never found himself running that wide open. And he was one of the most explosive players of the last decade. Whenever Will Fuller beat a guy, he just outran him. It was never like there's no one near him, right? Telling me Devontae Smith is that much faster than Will Fuller? No, it's scheme. And if you look at the big plays Will Fuller had, against Virginia in 2015, against USC, against Stanford, they were all plays where the guy was trailing him. He just was faster.
It was literally our guy's better than your guy.
Right. That was not what was happening now it happens at times. I mean, there was a play last night where Devontae Smith just smoked Sean Wade. Just
it was just a go route.
Most overrated corner in the country, by the way.
It was just a go route on the right side.
That was a Will Fuller play. That was just correct. I'm better than you.
Yeah. He ran a better route.
Right.
He stuck his foot on the inside and just went right around him up the top.
But I'm sorry, Javon McKinley doesn't score a 42-yard touchdown on that. But Javon McKinley catches a 35-yard back shoulder on that.
Sure.
You can't. It's not 42 touchdown or nothing. It's not. It's 25 and you're still moving the chains.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And when I look at like Will Fuller, I say, what if Will Fuller was used in a way like Devontae Smith is? What kind of sick, ridiculously stupid numbers would he have been able to put up? What if Chase Claypool was utilized for an entire season, that way? And then here's the other point. You're asking Ian Book to play like you'd ask Trevor Lawrence to play. Make these precise reads and there's a low margin for error because everything is downfield and all these kind of things. And it's like, he's not that guy. Right. So why are you asking him to be that guy? Why is he not running RPOs? Why is he not running read zone? Why is he not moving the pocket more? I watched a play against Clemson where they booted Justin Fields out, but the way that they teach their bootleg, he's kind of attacking downhill. So it's very easy for him to transition into a run. Notre Dame would do that. And Ian Book's running laterally. That's bad coaching.
It's not how I teach boots.
Right. And it also negates an athletic kid who could do damage with his legs. So again, when I look at Ian Book, I say this is more than an Ian Book thing. Ian Book is being asked to execute a system that he shouldn't be asked to execute, and Chip Long got a little bit too complicated in 2019 compared to where he was in 2018. And there's a reason Ian went from averaging 300 yards a game as a starter to barely 200 in his second year. Think
Yeah.
about that. Ian Book in his 9 starts in 2018 averaged 290.6 passing yards per game. If Ian Book would have averaged 290.6 passing yards per game and run a similar offense this year, Notre Dame would have been playing they would have played Alabama for the title, but it would have been last night. It wouldn't have been in the semifinals.
Right.
Because they would have beat Clemson. Flat out would have beat Clemson. And so it's continued regression. We've seen it all the time. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything you explained about what Ian Book does well, I think that's what Alabama did last night.
Yeah.
Put Ian Book on that team, on Alabama's team, and put him in crimson and white. Do you think he could do the things that Mac Jones did?
Not to 52 points, no.
Okay.
Because I don't think Ian Book – here's the biggest difference between Mac Jones and Ian Book. Mac Jones processes things extremely quickly. His anticipation is outstanding. I agree. Ian Book can't do that. So some of those downfield throws that were effective, I don't know if Ian Book can do. But part of me wonders, is that because of how they're teaching it?
Bingo.
We've seen this
ask you. Yeah.
in the past too. Deshaun Kaiser had this issue. Brandon Wimbush had this issue. Tommy Reese had this issue. I mean, Everett Golson had this issue. So either they're getting quarterbacks that don't know how to read defenses every single year, and they complained about that with Phil Dracovic too. And he didn't have any problem reading defenses at Boston College this year, And so part of me wonders if you need to look in the mirror. And again, as we've said before, other teams are simplifying while Notre Dame is getting more complicated. So I don't, when I watch that post drag concept, that's not a read by Devontae Smith. He's running a post corner. Simple as that.
Right.
The reads that they're doing are more of a, you're running a vertical and you sit because the guy's playing over top in the cover 3. Well, Notre Dame can do that, and they do that effectively. It's how they run their 4 verts. If they're playing cover 3, you get to 20 and bang it, and it's a comeback. That kind of thing. That's simple. Those are not the kind of post snap reads that we're complaining about.
Sure.
And ours are. It could be an out, a post, or a stop. That's you know what I mean. Like those are just
sure. No, I get it.
Asking college kids to do so. Based on what we saw of Ian Book, no, he can't do that. And I don't know if he could process information quickly enough. But the thing is, they wouldn't have asked him to do that.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Right.
Steve Sarkisian wouldn't have asked Ian Book to run the same exact offense he ran with Mac Jones because he built around that. Sure. Just like they did different things with Tua. You look at that offense when Tua was in the game compared to Mac Jones. And that's why Alabama's offense was so much better this year than it was last year when Mac Jones took over. Because
it wasn't built for Mac Jones.
It wasn't. It was built for Tua. They had 4 first-round picks at wide receiver last year, and they were really good on offense. I mean, they still scored 40 points in the 2 games they lost, but they weren't as good as they are now. Sure. But even though the talent was better, so
I got you.
Would Ian Book have scored 52 last night? Probably not. But I would say this: Alabama probably would have ran it more and more effectively. Could Ian Book have scored in the 40s and won them the game? Yeah, I think so. But they wouldn't have been winning because of Ian Book, looking like Joe Burrow.
No, I got you.
It would have been different. And there are things you'd have seen more RPOs, more quick game, more screens. Those are things that you need to allow a quarterback to do. And when Ian Book had the few opportunities to do that, I mean, think of the Duke game. He hits that little quick tunnel screen to Kyron Williams, goes for 75 yards. He hits a screen over top to Chris Tyree for 27 yards against Alabama. I mean, I just if Ian Book can't read inside zone handoff and determine whether I'm going to pull and throw a slant or hand off, then he shouldn't have been your starting quarterback. Simple as that. I mean, you should have said, hey, we got this really talented Phil Dracovic kid who, is raw, needs to learn stuff, but he's clearly no one should be questioning whether or not he's got more talent than Ian Book. That's not a debate. It's whether at that stage of his career he was better or whatever. But if Ian Book couldn't do simple things like pull an outside zone and throw a screen back, a look screen backside, or hey, they're tucked in the box, I'm just going to pull it and immediately throw the bubble. If he couldn't do things like that from a mental standpoint, he never should have been your starting quarterback.
Well, you wouldn't be my starting quarterback in high school if you couldn't do that stuff.
Right. So I'm being
honest with you.
I know he can do it, but you got to rep it. You just don't take 5-10 reps at an RPO. RPOs are what you do every single
it's muscle memory.
Snap.
It's muscle memory. You have to do it all the time, and you have to rep it from day one of spring ball, fall camp.
Who you are.
That's your drill.
Yes.
You do the same drill and it gets boring and the guys complain about it, but it becomes muscle memory when you're
Go
in a
watch
game.
how many times Devontae Smith blocked last night. And it's not because he can't block. I would put nothing past. He's a little guy, but he would fight, scrap, claw, do whatever he had to do. It's just that's not what they do. An RPO is literally something you do every play. It's
right.
We're called. So if you're still unclear what an RPO is, here's what it is. It's called a run pass option. It's not like a read zone, right? It is the offensive line and the running back are literally running a run play inside zone. And there's
that's
no
why
call.
One of the Alabama offensive linemen got called for man
Correct.
downfield because
that's
they're
right.
blocking a run play.
Correct. There's no check, there's no call, there's nothing. It's not a play action. It's not a read zone. It is I'm handing off or I'm pulling and I'm throwing.
Right.
The receivers on the same play are running a pass concept, whether it's a screen or a downfield pass concept. And they're both doing that every single play. There's only one person with a decision to make, and that's the quarterback. And that's it. So it's not a check. It's not an audible. It's something you literally do every single play. And it's essentially to say I'm saying this a bit hyperbolically, but it's a foolproof offense.
It is.
As long as now the coaching is
whatever they do, they're wrong.
Right.
That's the concept that I teach to my kids. It's, hey, what the defense does, whatever they do, they're wrong because this is what we're going to do.
Now, your job as a coach is to make sure that the schemes that you're implementing with your RPOs are effective, right? So you could have a bad run call and a bad pass call, and they're going to destroy it because you're not attacking their defense correctly. What Notre Dame does is Notre Dame requires the perfect play call. And we're going to have a podcast on this because I was very much against the Tommy Rees hire, very much against. But I'm also very much against all these people saying he needs to be fired. Because and we're going to have a podcast about that later this week where I'm going to talk about how Tommy Rees is, in fact, could be the answer to Notre Dame's problems. And I'll explain why. Because Joe Moorhead's not leaving Oregon, right? Like Steve Sarkisian's not going to turn down the head coaching job at Texas to come to Notre Dame, right?
Notre Dame.
So we'll get into that. But the problem is at the top. The problem is Brian Kelly. Tommy Rees is running the offense Brian Kelly wants him to run. And that's where Notre Dame, for me, is further away than even quarterback. Because, again, quarterback, you can't tell me that with Dane Christ, with Everett Golson, with Gunnar Kiel, with Malik Zaire, with Deshaun Kaiser, with Brandon Wimbush, with Phil Dracovic, with Ian Book, and now upcoming with Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner, that in that stretch, not once did you have a championship caliber quarterback. You can't tell me that. Either you're terrible at evaluating recruits at quarterback, and it's been every single quarterback's coach, Charlie Molnar, Chuck Martin,
Matt
LaFleur, all of them, Matt LaFleur, right? Who he did put no effort into recruiting. I know. Mike Denbrock, but what's the one constant been?
Brian
Kelly, right? So I'm not blaming Tommy Rees for this. It's a program problem that your quarterbacks, and it's also not a shock that Ian Book did the same exact thing that every other quarterback did, which is he was at his best early in his career when he was young, and they were forced to simplify the reads and the calls and the checks. It's not a shock because if Notre Dame would have played on offense throughout Ian Book's career like they did his first few starts, our narrative about Notre Dame is much different now. Okay.
Yep. Nope.
So that's where, to me, it's beyond the quarterback. It's a coaching issue.
So to recap, offensive line, check. Tight ends, check. Running backs, check. Yeah, right. Wide receivers, check.
Personnel,
you can win with these wide receivers. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
We're talking personnel. Quarterback need to upgrade potentially. But I think the biggest non-check mark here is coaching and scheme and all of that. And we don't need to rehash it, but that's kind of the recap for where we are with the offense. I mean, I think they can compete in the vast majority of these categories.
They're not as far off as people think.
That's exactly the point.
They're not. Alabama was a 35 to 37 point per game team up until 2018.
Yes.
So Notre Dame is 4 to 5 points behind them, right?
Yeah.
Alabama got into the modern era and they're scoring 49. So what does that mean? Notre Dame can get to 42.
Okay.
I'll take that and enjoy my championship coverage.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I hear you.
Right.
So defensively for Notre Dame, let's talk defense because I think that across the board they're probably closer than the offense.
Except for one position, correct?
Except for one position, and that's fair. So let's start defensive line. I think defensive line, and you want to look at what they've got going into 2021 or where they've been the last few years.
Yeah,
I got a huge check mark at defensive line.
It is now. See, here's where the defensive line has come. In 2018, it was more about you had really good starters and Tillery inside, and then outside on the edge, you were loaded.
Sure.
Inside, it was a bigger question mark. 2017, big question mark up the middle.
Sure.
The depth up the middle was the problem.
Yep.
I'll fast forward to 2020. There's no first-round draft pick on this group.
Agreed.
I love Adi Takumba, Ogundeji, and Dalen Hayes. They're not first-round draft picks.
Agreed.
They're not. I think there's two ways to have a great defensive line. One is to have great individual players like Clemson had in 2018.
Yeah.
The other way is to have just be able to throw waves of athletic players at a team. And that's what Notre Dame has been able to do.
Correct. And frankly, I would rather have it as the waves and waves because I would
rather have it waves of elite players, right? Like, you know what I mean? But like,
okay, fair.
I'm just kind of messing.
But but what I'm saying is I think you can sustain the waves better than you can sustain getting 5 stars all the time.
Yes.
Right? Because there is ebbs and flows,
especially in Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
And that's one of those things where I think the current staff, and that's why I thought Mike Elko and Clark Lee were such great hires. Because and this is why I also think Marcus Freeman's a great hire. If you hire a guy from Bama, he's going to be it's kind of why I said like guys like Magic Johnson and John Elway would be horrible, and Peyton Manning would be like horrible coaches. Michael Jordan, horrible coach.
Yeah,
because I can't teach you to play the game the way that I play, which is I'm just better than everyone.
Right.
Whereas a guy like Larry Bird could be a better coach.
Sure.
Because
he was.
I can teach great work ethic and fundamentals and high IQ, those kind of, right? You see what I'm saying? And so a Bama guy say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't have Devontae's, just in theory, right?
Sure.
And so I think, especially if we're talking I'm talking defense here, right? We're not talking offense because we've talked about how great they're schemed on offense. Defensively, the guys that have run Kirby Smart would not be a very good defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. I think he'd be downright terrible because his scheme is built around having elite players. What has happened at Notre Dame is they've hired coaches that understand how to build an elite defense without having elite players. And when they've had elite players, those guys have been really good because they coached to it. So like Mike Elko did not come from a place at Wake Forest where it was like, hey, I've got this first round pick and that first round pick. And those
they had to develop.
They developed Jesse Bates into an NFL player.
And they had to do their homework on the recruiting trail to find guys that fit the system that they wanted to run.
Right. Jeremiah Koromoa, Myron Tonga. I mean, so, I look at it and I say, now the next step for Notre Dame on the defensive line is I do think they need to up their recruiting a little bit. Take that next step now. You've shown that you can develop. Now go after some of those big time players and you get one a year. You're going to be great, And so I think that high level talent at defensive tackle the last 2 years has taken a step up, right? We're talking about Myron Tungavaloa and Kurt Heinisch and they're high motor guys, but the last couple of years you've added Riley Mills. He's a high upside talent. I could see Riley Mills becoming a high draft pick someday. I could see Gabriel Rubio becoming an All-American caliber player. I could see Aiden Keana becoming a difference maker kind of player. So I think the size and my 2 knocks at defensive tackle 2 years ago were after Tillery, the size was a concern and the high upside talent was a concern. Next year with Jason Adamiola, with Jacob Lacey, if he can come back and be healthy, with Riley Mills now another year in the system, with Aiden in another year in the system, with Rpo Rubio coming as a highly advanced freshman, size and strength wise, I feel great. Now, is there a first round pick in there? Not yet. Maybe down the road, but not yet.
Yeah, could
be. But man, I'll go to battle with that group.
Absolutely.
And defensive end, Isaiah Foskey to me is the most physically gifted Notre Dame defensive end they've had. Jordan Patelho was was a top 100 recruit. Now the strong side needs a little bit more work, but I love Alexander Ahrensberger's upside. I love Jason Onye's upside. I love those high upside guys, but I do think the next step for them is to start taking some swings for some of those top level
Sure.
players.
Yeah, nothing wrong
And
with that.
you only need to get one every couple years. That's really
Right.
all you need to do.
Agreed.
Along with the guys you're already getting, right?
Correct. Above and beyond. Yeah, right.
Correct. So, so I think defensive line, I think Notre Dame has put themselves in position where when I watched them against Clemson, when I watched them against Alabama, their struggles on defense were not up front. If anything, those teams, and we talked about this, I think, at the beginning of the show, those teams game planned a way to not allow the defensive line. And the mark of a truly healthy position group is, can you lose players and keep going? They lost Jerry Tillery and were better the next year, right? They were on defensive line. Now, not because of not having Jerry Tillery, but they were more productive on the defensive line the year after Jerry Tillery left. This defensive line without Khalid Kareem and Julian Okwara and Jameer Jones was better than last year's. Not because those guys are necessarily better individual players, but they were able to replace those guys and be great. Dalen Hayes and Adi Ogundeji stepped in lineup and more than made up for the losses. And then Isaiah Foskey and Ovia Gofu and Justin Adamiola stepped into the lineup and took over those backup roles. And then that's how you keep it going.
Absolutely.
And so I think that they're in a really good place. I would like to see a little bit more of a high-end talent on the edge.
Okay.
Is the thing. So I say the defensive line is there, but I think you're going to see the defensive line, the margin for error is a lot thinner than it may be for a team that, maybe has more truly elite defensive linemen. So if they're not on that level, they're really close on the edge. Inside, no problems.
Yeah.
Loaded inside.
Yep.
And they're getting bigger. That's the big thing from the last two classes. Mike Elson going out and getting Jacob Lacey, who's a bigger guy, getting Aiden Keana, getting Gabriel Rubio, and then matching him with the athleticism of Jason Adamiola and Riley Mills. That's the combination you need. And that's why I feel really good about the future of the defensive interior.
So, and obviously we like the coaching at that level as well.
Yeah.
So we don't need to jump into that. We know. Linebacker for Notre Dame. What are your thoughts on that position? Are they championship caliber at that spot?
I think talent-wise they are. I think one of the knocks I have on Clark Lee is I thought at times he put recruiting, yes, but at times I thought he put a little bit too much emphasis on perfection, and not just letting guys play.
Okay.
Now that worked for Drew Tranquil because that's what Drew Tranquil wanted and needed, right? But I felt like at times he got a little bit robotic with what he was asking guys to do. And you could see it with Drew White. Like when Drew White was trying to read and react and all this he would always be late. But then after the first couple series, he just let him go and it's like flat of the ball. From what I've been told by sources, Jeremiah Wusu at first, there was issues with they're trying to say, hey, do this. And after a while, they're just like, okay, just get out of his way and just let him go.
Yeah.
Be a heat seeking missile. Right.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what Freeman can do with this group.
That's the thing I was going to say, because he allows it. Not that they freelance, because you can't have linebackers freelance.
No, you can't, because then you're going to overrun stuff and you're going to be out of position.
That's not what we're talking about. It's here's your job, but I'm going to launch you from different places. It's going to look like you're freelancing. It's organized,
it's controlled chaos, baby.
Perfect way of saying it. And that's what I see from the Cincinnati defense. There's a lot of it. Look, Shane Simon should be a better player than he is. He's not an instinctive guy. So stop asking him to be an instinctive guy and just turn him loose.
Yeah.
And if you can't do it, then do it with Marist. You had Jack Lamb, talent at linebacker, Bo Bauer. Notre Dame had plenty of talent at linebacker this year. I thought just at times they got a bit robotic. There's this, you need to be perfect with this, and this. And that's fine to a degree, but once the game starts, you need those guys playing fast.
No, I agree.
And I, look, linebacker in 2018 was not an issue for Notre Dame. Osmar, the way he developed last year, you had Jeremiah Wusu as one of the best linebackers in the country in the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, it was one of the
I'm
best.
not talking about this year. I'm talking about in the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
And say, look, linebacker's not an issue talent-wise. Now, they had a couple years where the recruiting was down. That's a concern. So you're going to Freeman's going to have to make an immediate impact, kind of get it. Now, the good thing is Bo Bauer played as a freshman on special teams. Shane Simon played as a freshman on special teams. They were only going to have 4 years of eligibility because of what happened this season. Now, they both were going to be done after next year. Now they have 2 more years left.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
Which is huge. Isaiah Pryor also now has
another year.
2 more years. So depending on how you want to utilize him. So Jack Kaiser got an extra year. He's got 4 years left still. So I think J.D. Bertrand, Osita Ekwonu, there's plenty of talent at linebacker. The question is, can you develop it? Now, that'll be the thing that is going to be the next step. But talent-wise, no issue with linebacker. None at all.
And again, excited about what Freeman can do. So,
yeah.
Secondary. And I almost want to split this up to corners and safeties, but we'll do secondary as a whole, and you can break it down as you talk about it. Go ahead.
This is the place where they're behind.
Yes,
and you take away Kyle Hamilton, and they're way behind.
Way behind.
And there was some recruiting issues that happened. The thing about it is they're way behind now. They weren't 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they had a secondary that could have competed with anybody, especially at cornerback. And all the complaining and bitching people did last year about Troy Pride, you put Troy Pride on this year's defense, and there's a whole different thing. You know, it's like they were so spoiled. Fans were so spoiled by how good the corners were the years before.
Yep.
That they started nitpicking Troy Pride. Unnecessarily so. He was very good last year. So anyway, cornerback took a huge step back, and we started to see some of the recruiting losses. You know, Paulson Adebo, Thomas Graham, Elijah Hicks. You know, some of those that 2016, 2017.
Did they make up for it in this class?
We'll see. I love this cornerback class.
Okay.
I love the size. I love the versatility. I think that they need, but the thing is, they got to do it consecutively. One recruiting class isn't fixing it.
Right.
I think Landon Bartleson hurt them. I think if he would have been able to stay in school, that would have been a big one. Clarence Lewis, you know, stepping up. I mean, so you put Clarence Lewis plus the incoming recruiting class. I'm feeling a lot better about the future. Now, Mike Mickens has to do it one more year. Now, the good thing is because you signed 4 corners in this last year's class,
you don't have to be. You can go after some big fish.
Go after dudes, straight up dudes. And if they can upgrade, that's why I think Kerry Cooks would be a great promotion for Notre Dame, because you look at the list of players he's recruited, top level players. I think he'd be able to start bringing in some of those guys they miss. I like the safety class they brought in, but those 2 years where they just basically whiffed at safety, essentially after Kyle Hamilton, hurt them. And I think the development at the position has been poor. That was a coaching issue that has been, I think is going to be fixed. Again, another reason I think Kerry Cooks would be a good hire, because Terry Joseph was, to me, substandard for Notre Dame as a coach and a recruiter and a developer of young people. He's now gone. Who you replace him with is going to be very, very important. I think Mike Mickens is off to a good start, but you know, getting what they got out of the cornerback position this year with the talent they got, it was actually a really good coaching job by Mike Mickens. You've upgraded the talent, but now it needs to be a consistent thing. You can't have this strong. I mean, remember Troy Pride, Julian Love, and Dante Vaughn, one class, and then years where they didn't recruit well, and then, this big class. They can't do that anymore. You've got to have some level of consistency. So defensively in the secondary, I'm a little concerned. Okay. But if they can get Houston Griffith back, that'll help for 2021. But the future at safety is concerning because Kyle Hamilton next year.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the secondary is a question mark, and the cornerback play this year was not up to par. If you'd have put Julian Love and Troy Pride on this team,
different story completely. Yeah, no, I agree. So just as a recap, defensive line, check. Linebackers, I would say check
with an asterisk.
Okay.
Talent is there. The talent is there.
Yeah. And secondary would be a miss at the moment.
Now if they make the right hire, if they make the right hire at safeties coach, I like the future. And then of course landing Marcus Freeman to replace Clark Lee.
And that's overall.
Brian Kelly has now made 3 straight home run hires at defensive coordinator. Mike Elko was the perfect hire at that time. Yep. When he left before you thought, you promoted Clark Lee, great hire. And then now Marcus Freeman. I think might have been his best hire, to be honest with you.
Agreed. Because he could have very easily taken the easy way out. And I'm not saying it's the easy way and he would have done a bad job, but hiring Mike Elston, because he's there, he's your buddy, he's right, I'm glad they did what they did.
If any Notre Dame assistant deserved that opportunity, it was Mike Elston.
I get that. And I totally get that.
He's the epitome of loyal and loves Notre Dame. But look, you swung for the fences, you hit a home run, bring him in, and your defenses should keep rolling. So defensively, Notre Dame is, and to me, when we talk about the checks, Notre Dame's as a defense the last 3 years is a check. Outside of one game, the Michigan game last year was the anomaly.
Sure,
but the defense played well enough to beat Georgia both times. The defense played well enough to at least compete with Clemson in 2018 and Alabama this year. The defense is where you need to be. Brian Kelly's hitting all the right buttons, playing all the right notes on defense.
Yep.
You got to now do that on offense.
Absolutely
you do that
agree.
on offense, then Notre Dame. And look, wrap it up with this, Vince. They're not where they need to be as a program.
Agreed.
They're not as far off as some people think.
Also agree.
Brian Kelly's got to stop making excuses for why Notre Dame isn't getting the most out of Notre Dame. Realize that this administration has spent almost $1 billion upgrading your program in the last decade. Almost $1 billion. Think about that. The admission standards are absolutely in the wheelhouse of where you need them to be to go out and get top players. Anyone saying otherwise is either unaware of the actual standards or just being fed a line of bull from people in the Goog. Flat out, there's no more excuses. And you've brought the program a long way. Great job, coach. Phenomenal job. You want credit for something? I'll give you a lot of credit. For the program was a joke when you took over, and it's now knocking on the door. But now it's up to you as the head coach of Notre Dame to kick the dang door down. And if he's willing to make the changes, I might have some stuff on Irish Breakdown coming up the next couple of days. If he's willing to make the necessary changes and stop making excuses and say, hey, it's up to us to get it done, and he goes out and does it, Notre Dame within 2 years, in my opinion, it won't be 2021 because there's just a lot of turnover. But within 2 to 3 years, I think Notre Dame can compete for and win a national championship. I fully believe that with every ounce of my being. But it's going to require Brian Kelly to make those changes. If he's willing to do it, and it doesn't mean firing Tommy Rees or firing anybody. It means you make the philosophical changes, let Tommy Rees go out and be a young, smart coach, stop being stubborn, and this program can take the next step and start working on the freaking recruiting trail.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well,
over.
One final, and I just want to echo a little bit of what you just said. 2021, depending on what he does in 2021 and how he does a lot of the things that we've been talking about, okay? I've got 2022 circled as something that could be a special year because that schedule is difficult, but if they can go through that schedule and be competitive in that schedule, I think they can turn a lot of heads.
Here's something else too, Vince, that people aren't talking about. If Notre Dame does what they need to do in 2021 to get their roster and their scheme and their philosophy in 2022, they can knock Clemson and Ohio State out of the playoff. This is what people don't think about. Like, oh, that's hard teams. They could knock us out. Yes, the opposite is true.
Yeah.
If Notre Dame beats Ohio State and Clemson, or just one of them, they're probably knocking that team out.
Sure.
Of the playoff.
Yeah,
probably
starts in September of 2022.
That's right. So yeah, ready. I mean, so they've got the sketch 2023, same thing. So the opportunity is there. This offseason is going to determine whether they get there. If he waits till the summer before 2022, it's not going to work. They're going to get the doors blown off.
Right.
It's got to happen now. If he makes the changes now, between now and August,
agreed,
then I think Notre Dame could get over that final hump. Not next season, but they're laying the foundation to getting over that final hump, and that's the exciting part. But also the nerve-wracking part because we don't know if he's going to do it.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. For Bryan Driskell, I'm Vince DeDario. We will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.